Okay, so I want to summarize some of the important points from Isaiah 14, 1 through 4, and then I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about something that comes up both at the end of the summary and also is mentioned in Isaiah 13. And then after we do those things, we'll move into Isaiah 14, which is the taunt against the king of Babylon, and is still part of this first oracle, which is Isaiah 13 and 14. So hopefully you were able to understand that, but if not, it'll still happen, and then you'll see what's going on. Um, so let's read Isaiah 14, 1 through 4. I'll go ahead and do that. For the Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel and will set them in their own land. And sojourners will join them and will attach themselves to the house of Jacob. And the peoples will take them in and bring them to their place. And the house of Israel will possess them in the Lord's land as male and female slaves. They will take captive those who were their captors and rule over those who oppress them. When the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has ceased, the insolent fury ceased. So we've spent a couple of weeks now talking about what the ideas here that are being expressed in this section of 14, this middle section of the Oracle against Babylon. You remember the first part is basically a prophecy of the destruction of Babylon by the Medes, and then the last part is a taunt about the Babylonian king who is portrayed as having died and descended into Sheol in the taunt. And in between them are these 4 verses, 3.5 verses, about the restoration of Israel. And so it's about God's people and his faithfulness to his covenant. And that, I think, is actually not only the center point of the oracle, but it is the real reason for all of the judgment and all of the restoration. And what I wanted to highlight just in the next couple of minutes is something I talked about before as we kind of went through it, is that this whole section, these 4 verses, 3.5 verses, are about reversals of the current situation and the coming reversal that the Lord will bring. And so I have a little table on the handout, and I'll just read through it. And we can talk about any of those if we need to or want to. So right now, the people of Judah are under the Lord's judgment, and they're feeling his disfavor for their sins. But later, the Lord will again have compassion and grace upon them. And so this is a great reversal, and that's 14:1. You can kind of follow along by looking at 14. They were apparently rejected by the Lord, not in actuality, but to all appearances, they're rejected by the Lord, meaning they're not feeling his favor. But he's going to choose them again. So this is a reversal. They were exiled from the land. He's going to bring them back and set them back in the land. They were attached to other people, Gentiles, by virtue of losing their national identity and being scattered among these nations. But the Lord is going to make them regain their national identity by putting them back in the land. And people from other nations will attach themselves to them. So it's a complete opposite reversal of what's currently going on. They will have been led away from the Lord and his land by the Gentiles. Well, actually, they're led away from the Lord by themselves, but it's a poorly written explanation there. Whoever wrote that didn't do that right. But they are led back to the Lord by the Lord and his land, to the land by the Gentiles. They're subject to the nations now, but ruling over nations in the reversal. They are captives and oppressed now, but they're at liberty in the reversal. They're serving the nations now, but then they will be served by the nations. They are at hard, toilsome labor now, and they will be at rest then. And then the last one I have is they're victims of taunts. And I have an example there, which we'll look at in a second. But the reversal is they're victorious, and at least in Isaiah 14, they're taunting others. So we have these reversals that are going on in Isaiah 14, 1 through 3, 4. And so I think that's the significant thing that you're supposed to get out of the passage, is that the Lord is bringing the great reversal. He's going to do this when he sends the Messiah, and that all of the things that he has promised for his people will be then come to fruition, and including the things that he's promised for the world, which is judgment of the oppressors and justice being brought. So, does anybody have anything you want to add to that? So I thought it was important to kind of summarize it in terms of reversal, because that is what the Old Testament continually teaches, is that the present condition of God's people will be reversed when the Lord makes everything right. And so that's what this is looking forward to. And it's even obviously still true in our day. The Lord will reverse the situation of his beleaguered and persecuted people um, on that last day. And so we look forward to that.
Yeah, we have to remember too, he restores the land of freedom, not because they deserve it, but by his grace.
Absolutely. And that's how the passage starts, right? He's going to have compassion and grace on them again. And then all of those things that happen after that are what he's doing by his grace in his compassion, because he is the covenant Lord.
Well, too, as I was reading in verse 4, though, on the king of Babylon, and I had heard, and it's always been startling to me about what was said about it, that this referred that it's kind of referred to a Roman antichrist who was decked with gold and having a golden cup in her hand. Have you heard anything like that?
No. I mean, I can see why people might say that.
I haven't heard it. I only heard it one time, and I haven't heard it since. And I'm like, well, that must be true, because there'll be other people, other preachers saying it if that was true, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things you want to ask God to help you forget that.
Yeah, right. Well, I just wanted to clarify to make sure. I thought I was writing. That can't be true. That's hogwash. But
that's right.
But I wanted to clarify.
Well, people, there is something to be said about reading the Bible in such a way that you're trying to connect one passage with another. I mean, obviously that is what we should be doing. And so I can't really fault people for trying to do that, but that's not a line that you want to draw, between those two passages.
Yeah. So. Right.
All right. So in the last reversal, I said they're victims of taunts, and that later they'll be victorious in taunting others. Psalm 137 verse 3 is an example of them being victims of taunts. I'll read 1 through 3 here. And this will move us into the next section, which is the new thing that I've added for today. So Psalm 137, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Okay, so the context is they're in Babylon. The author who's writing this is writing about it. As you can see, there's no author given. So the unnamed psalmist is in Babylon, or picturing being in Babylon, but probably in Babylon. And he said, we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. That would be the exiles who come out of Judah, and they remember Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and the temple and their life there. And they probably remember it really like it was the most beautiful life, like the Israelites remembered Egypt, when they were in the wilderness. They're probably looking back with some tempered nostalgia there. But anyway, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there, we hung up our lyres, musical instruments. For there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. So they're being taunted. The songs of Zion typically being referred to here would be something like the last several Psalms in the Psalter, which are all about the victory of God over the nations and the glory of God being spread over the world and the exaltation of Zion as the place where God is, where all the nations hear and learn of God. And of course, none of this looks true when you're sitting by the waters of Babylon as captives, right? And so the captors come to them and say, hey, sing us some of those happy songs that say how great your God is. Um, Verse 4, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. The Edomites, during the destruction of Jerusalem, through, which is where all these Jewish people have come from, right? Jerusalem's been destroyed; they've been exiled out of the land. The Edomites kind of stood on the sidelines and pointed out the people who were escaping Jerusalem to the Babylonians. There goes another one, go get him, that kind of thing. So they were traitors. Verse 8, O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed. Blessed shall be he who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall be he who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. So I thought I'd talk about the last verse there because undoubtedly somebody's got a question. And people, I read something this morning which I just share with you, and you can see how ridiculous this is just on the surface. Some atheist in a debate said that he could never worship the Christian God because that Christian God said, in addition to, blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. He said, blessed are those who dash babies on the rocks. Like it was some kind of command, right? Or some kind of prescription for behavior. This is a description, not a prescription. But anyway, I thought we'd talk a little bit. So the context I already mentioned, they're in Babylon. They've been exiled there by God, but the Babylonians were God's instrument. And when Babylon came there, they didn't just knock on the door of Jerusalem and say, hey, God sent us to take you out of the land. Why don't you come with us? Because he's God. They didn't do that. They came with an army and they, raped women and killed children and dashed babies against rocks, and they leveled the temple and they took captives and they gouged people's eyes out. They did all kinds of stuff, right? And it's just the way warfare went. And they took them into exile. And you can see in that context that verse 8, O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall be he who repays you with what you have done to us. They're saying, these are the things you did to us. Here's the worst of it. You took our infants and dashed them against rocks, and blessed is the man who does that to you, right? And we still might read it and think that's a bloodthirsty vengeance, Paul. And I think maybe we'd be misreading it to think that. So I want to spend some time looking at that. And I have the handout I sent out, but it's also linked on the main outline that we're using right now. If you just go to that one, it's called Dashing Infants Against Stones. It's got something that you can, easy to remember. Not a pretty graphic. So we've read Psalm 137, and I don't think we need to read it a whole lot of times because it's pretty memorable. Most people that read Psalm 137, when they get to verse 9, they have a really hard time forgetting that. So, but let's look at Isaiah 13, 11 to 18, and see what's going on here. This is God's word against Babylon. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind and the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place at the wrath of the Lord of hosts in the day of his fierce anger. And like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, each will turn to his own people, and each will flee to his own land. Whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes, their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver, and who do not delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men, they will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb, and their eyes will not pity children. This is a prophecy of the fall of Babylon. And this prophecy includes the dashing of infants against stone. I just want to mention here that as a matter of chronology, the prophecy of Babylon's destruction precedes Psalm 137 by, 150, 200 years. So Psalm 137 is not saying anything new. It's actually repeating the words from this prophecy. And so you have that. Nobody ever balks when you read it in Isaiah 13. We all think, yeah, the Babylonians totally deserve that. And we don't even blink an eye at it when we read that their infants are going to be dashed on the stone. But when we see it on the lips of God's people in Psalm 137, we have a problem with it. So we're going to have to look at why we might think that's a problem. But um, it's interesting to me. So we also have other instances in the Bible. 2 Kings 8:12 says, this is a prophecy of Elisha. He's prophesying the destruction that Hazael, the king of Aram or Syria, will bring upon the Israelites. And so this is it. And Hazael said, why does my Lord weep? And he answered, because I know the evil that you will do to the people of Israel. You will set on fire their fortresses. You will kill their young men with the sword and dash in pieces their little ones and rip open their pregnant women. So this is also prior to Psalm 137. It's not, it's probably actually the first time this idea comes up in the Bible. Hosea 10:14 is also relevant. This takes place about 753, somewhere in there. And it's about the destruction of Beth Arbel by Shalman, and it's used by Hosea in his prophecy of the destruction of Israel. He's saying, this is going to happen to you, Israel. Therefore, the tumult of war shall arise among your people, and all your fortresses shall be destroyed, as Shalman destroyed Beth Arbel on the day of battle. Mothers were dashed in pieces with their children. He says, this is going to happen to you, Israel. Hosea 13:16, another prophecy against Samaria, capital of Israel. Samaria shall bear her guilt because she has rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Their little ones shall be dashed in pieces and their pregnant women ripped open. It's very awful, graphic language. It's meant to convey not just that's going to happen, but this is an extremely violent and awful thing. And everything that, anything between whatever and this is going to happen to you. This is, the extreme example of things. In Nahum 3:10, Nahum is describing the fall of Thebes, and he's going to use this fall of Thebes, this element, as part of his prophecy against Nineveh, the capital of Assyria.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, yes, she became an exile. She went into captivity. Her infants were dashed in pieces at the head of every street. For her honored men, lots were cast, and all her great men were bound in chains. So this is it's a sadly typical part of ancient warfare, but it's also being used not only, I mean, there's a bit of almost figurative usage to this as we read it in the Bible. It becomes the example of the most extreme type of degradation and violence that the enemy could perpetrate on the victim here or on their opponent. And it stands for not only this, but everything else. And it could even mean all the bad things that they could do to you, which might not even include this, but that this is a stand-in for. But it certainly was a part of ancient warfare. So back to Psalm 137, you can remember it. Psalm 137, verse 8 talks about paying back what you did, right? Blessed is he who pays back to you what you did, right? So that's in the Bible, or in there's a principle of judgment, justice, a principle of justice, which in Latin we call lex talens. Lex talens, the law of just retribution, getting back what you gave, whatever you did, reaping what you sow, exactly, right? And the purpose of that law, or laws like that, are to say, if somebody, you know, steals your iPod, you can't kill them for it, right? It's to maintain justice, to put restriction on things. So here's Exodus 21, 23 to 25. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. It's very insistent on the punishment fits the crime. That's the thing that's being done here. This part of Exodus is it's a law code, and it's for the civil magistrate, right? It's not telling people, general people like you and me, that if your neighbor steals from you, that you're able and authorized and pretty much obligated to break into his house and steal from him. It's not saying that at all. It's saying, or if he punches you in the face and you lose a tooth, that to restore justice, you have to do the same thing to him. It's a legal principle that says, look at the crime and have an appropriate punishment for that crime, not one that exceeds it and not one that is too soft, but one that's just right. So we have that again in Leviticus 24, 19 to 20. If anyone injures his neighbor as he has done, it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, whatever injury is given a person shall be given to him. This is again not to the neighbor, but to the legal system, basically. Talking to the judges in Deuteronomy 19:21, your eye shall not pity, it shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Now, some critic has said that I think I heard Catherine say something. 1 second, Catherine. Some
Sure.
critic has said that if the Jews actually did this, then pretty much everybody would be missing one eye and one hand and one foot in their society, because and I thought, that's really an overstatement. I don't read a whole lot about Israelite culture, poking the eyes out of their neighbors all the time. They're not doing that, but the principle is equality in punishment. Catherine, were you going to make a comment?
No, I was going to ask you please to repeat the chapter and verse in Deuteronomy that you just read.
Yeah, 19:21.
Thank you.
19. Sure.
Thank you.
So those are repeated in the three major law books of the Old Testament, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and they are the basis for justice. These are pretty graphic illustrations of what it looks like to be just.
Well, this eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and all that, was it that under the law? We're under grace now. We're no longer under the law.
Yeah, so we will get to Jesus's statement about that. You've heard it said, eye for an eye, but I say, and he says something different. We'll get to that in a little bit, and we'll talk about that. The short answer, though, Shirley, is that the principle of justice still stands, and we'll see that as we look at passages. And the important thing to remember is that these passages about the administration of civil justice are for the civil magistrate. They're not rules or guidelines for people like the general citizenry, except in the sense that
No.
we are to be just and righteous. But we're not to take the law into our own hands. Somebody breaks the law by killing my brother, I'm not supposed to go and kill that guy's brother or kill that guy.
Mhm.
That's not my position. It's God has put civil magistrate in place to do that. So it's basically, I don't know if anybody's what your stance is on the death penalty, but this is a death penalty appropriate type of law, right?
Mhm.
So Second Chronicles 6:23. Second Chronicles 6:23. I just want to read a couple more from the Old Testament to show that it's not just in the law, but it's in the history books and also in the prophets. So Solomon is praying. So Solomon, smart guy, wise guy. Then hear from heaven and act, and judge your servants, repaying the guilty by bringing his conduct on his own head, and vindicating the righteous by rewarding him according to his righteousness. Okay, this is a eye for eye, tooth for tooth ethic, right? It is a prayer to God for repaying the guilty by bringing his own conduct back on his own head. Okay, it's exactly the same thing we just read. It's just another different articulation of it. And this one now includes rewarding the righteous, which is not part of the legal code, right? So
Mhm.
he's asking God to be just. Of course, you don't have to ask the just God to be just. He's basically saying, let us see your justice. Jeremiah 16:18. And now we get a problematic statement. Jeremiah 16:18. But first I will doubly repay their iniquity and their sin. Oh, wait, this is not eye for an eye. This is two eyes for one eye. What's going on here? Right? Because they have, one, polluted my land with the carcasses of their detestable idols, and two, filled my inheritance with their abominations. Two things, pay back double. So that's what's going on there. We have the same type of language in Revelation 18. So now we're going to look at the New Testament. So this goes directly to Shirley's question. Doesn't the coming of Christ kind of relieve us from this type of law? Right. And if that were the case, then you would expect that type of law not to show up anywhere in the New Testament, but it actually does. Here's one instance, Revelation 18:6. God says, pay her back, as he's talking about Babylon the Great, the whore of Babylon. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Makes a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. Now, double portion again doesn't mean that there's any kind of inequity, but that her sins are they're multiplied. She does one thing and it's actually two different sins, or something like that. But you see the principle, right? Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her, right? Double for her deeds. So it's the lex talens cry for justice here. And so, and then Jesus says in Revelation 22:12, behold, I am coming soon, bringing my recompense with me to repay each one for what he has done. This is lex talens. This is exactly the Exodus passage that we started with, at least in principle. And so it's not done away with. It's actually part of God's character to be just and to repay people back with justice for what they have done, and to reward people for what they have done fairly, equally, completely, not too little, not too much, which should really impress us with, in a number of ways. One of them is that you look at the suffering of Jesus on the cross and you think that's an overwhelming, a lot amount of suffering. But it isn't one, it's not one, if you could measure suffering in ounces, it's not 1 ounce more of suffering than my sins deserve. My sins deserve that. That should really humble us and make us
Amen.
in awe.
Mm.
God is not unjust to pour out that much wrath on Jesus for my sins. He poured out exactly the wrath that was right for the sinners who were being saved. Um, so that gets us through, some of the major passages about this lex talents, both Old Testament and New Testament, and I've defined it as a principle of civil law that is reflective of God's just character. And we see that Jesus himself is going to, virtually the last thing he says in the Bible, he's going to apply this at the last judgment. So let's look at the Sermon on the Mount now. So there's another group of passages starting with Matthew 5:38 to 39. And so Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Who's Jesus speaking to? Is he speaking to the civil magistrate or to his disciples? His disciples, right? Everybody knows that. He's not saying, hey, here's how we run the law in the kingdom of God. Somebody slaps you, well, let him slap you again. That's actually not the law. That's not how the civil magistrate is supposed to administer. The civil magistrate would be accountable to God for failing to be just if he did this, right? This is a instruction, a command to the people of faith in their private dealings as citizens of their country and God's kingdom. But if they are if the Lord has put them in civil government and they're, say, a judge or something like that, if a judge did this, what do you think would happen? Right? This doesn't work for judges. This is not a law for judges. Judges are to pay back fairly with equity for crimes. And so that partly is the answer, surely. The Lord isn't overthrowing the Old Testament law. He's saying, don't you take the law into your own hands. The way you're supposed to act is gracious and long suffering. He's telling people that basically he's saying, if somebody treats you unjustly, well, let them treat you unjustly.
Right.
Because God will repay, right? We already know that God will repay.
Right.
So was this idea in the Old Testament? Proverbs 20:22. Do not say, I will repay evil. All right, somebody broke my leg, I'm going to break your leg. I will repay evil with evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will deliver you. Yeah, guess what? If somebody slaps you on the cheek, well, don't slap him back. He might even slap you another time. Don't slap him back. Wait for the Lord. Be slapped on the cheek.
Right.
So Jesus isn't actually saying anything new. It's not something that's not in the Old Testament already. But people who read Proverbs 22 and the other verses like it would not think it was in any way in conflict with the other passages we already read, because they have a different audience. Romans 12, New Testament, 17 through 19. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Behold, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
So the Lord doesn't, I mean, he hasn't changed his character. He's going to be just, and we can trust him to be just. And this is why we don't take the law into our own hands, um, because we trust the Lord, even when our earthly judges are dishonorable. The Lord will bring justice eventually. First Thessalonians 5:15. Okay, I have the whole chapter there, but I really just want verse 15. 5:15. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seeks to do good to one another and to everyone. This is actually an advancement on what Jesus said in Matthew 5. Jesus said other things which lead to this, but Paul has kind of combined the Matthew 5 passage with other things Jesus said, and he says, now just do good. Jesus went around doing good. That's what he did. You do it too. Um, and so it would be wicked and evil if we took the law into our own hands. When a judge does it, it's not wicked and evil. So 1 Peter 3:9, the last passage in this section here. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you are called, that you may obtain a blessing. He's thinking of the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, and Jesus, and obviously in Jesus's words. But it's the same consistent teaching, and it doesn't overthrow the principle of justice again, because that's not the context. It's not a context about you need to be just, but this is a context, to a civil magistrate, but it's a context of you need to live as servants of Christ who reflect his character, which was expressed in his incarnation. So those were the passages I had for this topic. Before we,
So,
yeah,
Chuck, can I just
yeah,
express that maybe a little more clearly in terms of like God's providence and how he works through people and how he appoints people for purposes?
yeah,
It might be helpful to think of this in terms of when you're faced with this situation and you're like, oh, well, this demands justice, right?
hmm
Like trust that God has appointed that God has appointed people to enact his justice on earth, and ultimately he will enact his justice in the end. And it's not really yours to worry about it. You just trust that God has appointed those to properly administer justice, right?
hmm
And in a similar way, he's appointed you through Christ to demonstrate his mercy and grace and how you and that's what you can be more concerned about in interacting with people, that God has appointed you there to demonstrate his mercy and grace by acting towards others in this way.
Mm. Amen. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
So
Chuck,
yeah, Susan.
this is Susan. So Matthew 7:12 says, "So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets." So is this kind of in the line of what you're talking about? Is that, if you're going to treat somebody, with evil, you're going to get evil back.
hmm Yeah, it is
So
right. Go ahead. Sorry.
So he's telling us that, basically we're to treat people with respect and love, and not the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, you know?
Right. Exactly. The for an eye, tooth for a tooth is only appropriate for somebody who the Lord has, in his providence, given a position of where they're a civil I keep saying magistrate, but somebody in the law system where they pass sentence and uh, execute justice and things like that on a civil level. But and that's the purpose for those passages, and that's who they were given to originally. And but we aren't the judge. We aren't the executioner. That isn't the jobs
Right.
that God has given us. So we are to
Right.
be law-abiding citizens. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no law that allows citizens to do wickedness. So we're to do good. And even in our broken human society, there's uh, not laws that allow people or that encourage people or tell people to be evil and wicked. Uh, that we're supposed to actually be doing good as a legal thing, and of course, how much more so for children of the kingdom of God who are in that society, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right. So Jesus says, make the rule for your own personal behavior. How do you treat others? You should treat them the way you want to be treated, and even if they treat you badly, you should still treat them the way that you want to be treated. But that doesn't mean, of course, it doesn't mean, right, that if somebody stole from you, that they haven't committed a crime and they haven't sinned.
Right.
And so
Right.
they are accountable for that, and there is nothing wrong with the legal system, stepping in there and arresting the person, giving them a trial, and sending, whatever their punishment is, exacting that on them. That's a different, separate category of conversation than how are you supposed to behave and what are you supposed to think about it. So, so yeah, thank you. Matthew 7:12 is a good, very good summary there.
I think it's a mindset too, because I'm going to tell you just a little bit of something that happened to me. When I was raising my kids, my middle daughter was very quick at thinking. And I used to teach them the scripture that when you treat people, you want to, treat people the way you want to be treated. And her little brother was being mean to her. And she looked at me one day and she says, well, Mom, he's treating me mean, so therefore he must want me to treat him mean.
Oh.
He turned it totally around. I was flabbergasted. So you got to be ready for that.
That's great. Yeah. So in logic,
but
that's
it is a mindset.
Yeah, it is a mindset, right? You have to decide that you're just going to do the right thing. Yeah, exactly. That's a great story. That's a great story. I can see how a kid can come to that. Yeah. Logical fallacies abound. Yeah.
It was one I had to quickly come up with something to say.
I would have just said that's the fallacy of affirming the consequent. When you're old enough, look it up. No, I would.
Yeah.
That's funny. All right. Well, I have a couple more comments on Psalm 137. So let's look at that again real quick. I want to look at verse 8. 137:8. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. NIV says, daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. I want to point out a couple of things. The people are really offended by Psalm 137, particularly verse 9 about the dashing of infants. That language, as we've seen, comes up several places in the Bible, in the Old Testament, describing ancient warfare, and as actually something that would happen to Babylon. So, Isaiah 13 prophesies that it would happen to Babylon. And so that helps us understand what's happening in Psalm 137 when it's mentioned again in verse 9, that the psalmist is just recalling what God has said will already happen and saying, God, I'm looking forward to the day that you bring justice and do what you have promised. Verse 8 says, and I'm going to substantiate that now. Verse 8 says, O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed. Doomed to be destroyed. How does he know that? How does he know that Babylon is doomed to be destroyed? Well, because God has said that. God has said that lots of times. Isaiah 13 and 14, Jeremiah 50 and 51, several places. But so he is relying on God's previous word, and he's wishing, praying, putting it in the psalm that the Lord would bring it to pass. And so that's what's going on in verse 9. He's not saying we should rise up and take Babylonian babies and smash them against the rocks. In fact, it's a singular. Blessed shall he be who repays you. Or NIV, more to the point. Happy is the one who repays you. Who is the one? Well, in the prophecies, the one who repays Babylon is Cyrus the Great. He is the one. One will come. The Lord will raise up an anointed, a Messiah, Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus the Great will overthrow Babylon. He will lead the Medes and the Persians, which is what the prophecy of Isaiah 13 is about. And Babylon will be defeated, made captive, destroyed under Cyrus, and he will set God's people free. He is the one. Now, historically, Babylon falls without a shot. No infant is dashed to the rocks, and hardly anybody dies. But some 50 years later, in 482 BC, Babylon revolts against Persia. And the king at that time is Artaxerxes, or Xerxes, who is the king, the husband of Esther. And he leads an army against Babylon. And he does all those terrible things you read about that they do in war, including the dashing of infants. And so Babylon, it actually literally happens to Babylon. And the one who accomplishes it is a Persian king, just not Cyrus. But on the final day, the one who will make all things right, is Christ. He is the one that ultimately Cyrus points to. Babylon then in that instance becomes, as I said earlier in chapter 13 of Isaiah, Babylon's being presented as the judgment on Babylon, but it's a judgment on the world, because Babylon is a picture of all the enemies of God. And Christ, the one, will come on that last day, and he will make things right. And that will include pronouncing terrible judgment on those who have opposed him and oppressed his people. And so he's the one too. But so Psalm 137 actually is really easy to understand. I think I don't have any problem reading that language. I don't have any problem understanding what's going on. This is chronologically, it's the last mention of 6 mentions of dashing babies against rocks in the Bible. It's the last one chronologically. And it relies upon the earlier ones, and especially Isaiah 13, which uses the same language and says it will happen to Babylon. He's just saying, just God, do what you said. We look forward to that. Do what you said. And we know it's not us that bring it about, but the one you are going to raise up that you promised that will deliver us. Have him. We look forward to him. Blessed be he. Blessed be him, the one. So if Psalm 137 sounded harsh and hard to understand at the beginning of the hour, I hope this has been helpful. Does anybody still have any issue or question about any of the things we talked about?
No.
So
I guess just a little more emphasis
yeah.
on the blessed part. So based on what you're saying about like God is appointing one to do this, and so these blessings here are not saying, well, if somebody does this, then they will earn like favor or blessings because they did it. It's rather saying that the one who does it is doing it under with God's blessings, so to speak. God has appointed them to do this. And
Right.
so It's not saying they will get blessings after they do it as a reward. It's saying this is the one who does this is doing it under God's appointment.
Right. And that is well said. And it's what I meant earlier when I said it's not a prescription. It isn't telling somebody what to do. It's describing something. It's a description. Right. Yeah. So one last word about Psalm 137, verse 9. So Psalm 130, there are, lots of Bible verses and concepts that are challenged and by critics, skeptics, atheists, and that are misunderstood or by Christians, a lot of them, or are uncomfortable for them. And Psalm 137:9 is generally thought to be in the top 2 or 3 difficult passages in this regard of apologetics. I mean, Daniel 9 is probably more difficult as an exegetical thing, but as a challenge to Christianity that Christians don't know how to answer. And I'm talking about general Christians in the pew, people who've spent, some time in it, know how to answer it. But Psalm 137:9 is the hardest one. It's the one or two top hardest one. But in the, after we've looked at the things we looked at this morning, I would say there's not even a question there. It's totally not hard to explain. It's completely easy to explain. It is totally understandable in its context, both chronologically and in relation to other passages that are in the Bible. And the whole concept of lex talens is understood. And as you can see, this is one of those passages because they're being repaid. And so you look at it and you go, really, this is the best the critic can offer. It's the point of that, really. And seriously, I've studied apologetics for, I don't know, a couple of decades, more than that probably. And I've been interested in it since I was like 16 years old. And they're all like this. They're all easy. There is not a hard one out there. But by the world standards and because of the ignorance of Christians to the Old Testament, basically, this just appears to be hard. It's not hard at all. It's easy. And all of them are like that. There's not one criticism of Christianity that is not simply explained if you just understand the context and the scriptures that it's relying upon. So I just want to say that as a matter of encouragement. If you come across something and you go, wow, I don't understand what's going on here, this seems really hard to me, it's actually not. It's going to turn out to be simple. But if you don't know how to approach it, it will be difficult, But if you come across things like that, bring them up. We'll be happy to talk about them. People have been criticizing the Bible and the Christian faith for 2,000 years, and nobody yet has come up with anything that is stuck. So,
Well, two things I've heard on it, and I don't know that either one of them are true. And the first one is that the first thing I've heard on it was that they took the infants from the mother's breast out of their arms and just dashed the brains against a rock, and that the children of Israel always believed in an eye for an eye, and that's why they did this, and that it was retaliation is what it was. To them it seemed more like retaliation rather than cruelty. And then another thing I heard on it was, allegorically speaking, was that this referred to the crushing and mortifying of sins in the heart of man.
I can see probably how you can get there. I don't know if it actually refers to that, but I can see that how it could be used in a sermon toward that effect. But as far as the retaliation, it's probably true that some Israelites, and maybe a lot of Israelites, felt when they read Psalm 139 that this was a psalm about retaliation. And I would submit then that they have read it wrong. God is not endorsing retaliation.
Mhm.
Is, the psalmist is writing, the psalmist is, as I've said, appealing to God to bring to pass what God has said he would do. And so that's certainly not retaliation. That's waiting for the Lord. He's not repaying evil for evil. He's waiting for the Lord to do it.
Mhm.
So yeah. And that's the thing, people read this and they think this must be retaliation, but it's not. It can't be. It first can't be, but you can also justify that it's not by just reading the words, slowly and thinking about them. But
Mm.
that make sense? And does it look like I explained it right? Does it look like I explained it right? I guess that's the important question.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
you have clarified what at least the things that I've heard from it.
good. Great. So, so again, that's one of the hardest challenges to Christianity. There it is. Pretty easy. So I just, it amazes me how blind. I mean, everybody's blind until the Lord opens their eyes, but
Amen.
there is no actual viable challenge to Christianity. Therefore, all challenges to Christianity are irrational and simply explained once you discover the irrationality. So yeah, this people don't need to be afraid of challenges to their faith, which is another reason why we should be talking to people about our faith out there, because we shouldn't worry about what they're going to say. Even if we don't know how to answer it right now, we know there's an answer. So, all right, I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll say a prayer.